Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to this next installment in the Eden webinar series. My name is Susan Kerr. I'm an extension specialist in Northwest Washington State. Today's presenter will be my colleague Lizann Powers-Hammond, who's located in South Central Washington State, and she'll be talking to us today about food safety concerns during emergencies. Lizann has a master's in human nutrition from WSU and a bachelor's in both public health nutrition and home economics. And she is ABD for a doctorate in education program with Washington State University. She's a certified nutritionist and has been an area extension educator since 1989 with WSU, focusing on food, nutrition, and food safety. She also has been a public health nutritionist and, bless her soul, a home economic classroom teacher, even in her past. She's won several state and national awards for her work, has been involved with the Food Sense program for years, and a large On the Road to Living Well with Diabetes grant from the USDA. She's produced and co-produced several peer-reviewed curricula and training materials, many fact sheets on the topics of nutrition and food safety, and some are translated into Spanish. And she's a frequent presenter on topics such as healthy weight, raising kids with positive body image and self-esteem, eating disorder, and oversees master food preservers and does many canning presentations and just all kinds of presentations and publications on this subjects of food safety and nutrition. And we're so pleased to have her here today with us. Lizann, do you want to advance the slides and we'll get started? One more time. And Mark, could you drop our first poll question in, please?
Sorry about that. Give me 1 second.
That's all right.
All righty, there we go.
Everybody, could you click on these? That are relevant to you. Mark, it doesn't seem like it's live. We can't.
Well, you as a panelist, you won't see it, but our attendees should be seeing it now.
I see it, but I can't click on.
Well, and again,
Okay.
as an attendee,
All right.
you won't be able to click on it. Yeah, I'm seeing a few folks that are starting to vote now.
Okay, so we can't stack the deck here.
Yeah. Well, you can, but even if you could, you wouldn't be able to see it. Again, it's a sort of a panelist versus a host.
Oh, I see down there.
We've got about 6 of 21, 8 of 21
Okay.
now.
And we're only addressing question number 1, correct?
Or poll number 1. Poll number 1 has 2 questions. So we've got about 14 of 22 now, 15. $17 of 22.
Oh, I forgot to mention, folks, if you have questions, put them in the question and answer pod down below. And you can also put comments or things you want to post in the chat pod as well.
We've got 21 of 22. Let's give that last person a few more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and end it, and then I will share the results now. So, Susan, are you able to see the results there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm just interpreting them. I'm really glad people are recognizing prolonged power outage is almost a universal issue and can be a side effect of all the others above. And Lizann, would that possibly affect food safety?
You will hear about that in the presentation to come.
Right, and I'm just always amazed to hear in Washington State we can just check yes to nearly every box except hurricane. We do have high wind events, but we don't get hurricanes here. Okay, very interesting. All right, thanks. And can you advance the slide, Lizann? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. I'd like to begin this by just thinking about the systems that are in place to help keep all well in our communities. Those systems also help us keep food safe. You know, a lot of the municipal services that are in place not only help with public health, but also with food safety. So they do help minimize the risk of foodborne illness. When those systems break down, there's a lot of concern with public health as well as food safety. You think about when my husband used to be a water sewer person for a municipality, and our joke was, when you flush the toilet, it all goes away and everything is good. But if you think about when those systems get disrupted, the water treatment plants, the septic systems, water safety, as well as electricity. So just a quick rundown of food safety rules and prevention of foodborne illness. First one, keep hot foods hot. Foods cooked thoroughly, as well as hot holding temperatures. Recommendation, cooking foods thoroughly, that depends on the food itself, but typically 165 degrees, and then hot holding 140 degrees or warmer. Keeping cold foods cold, our number we look for is 40 degrees or colder, and you'll hear lots more about that. Keeping everything clean, so free from dirt as well as microorganisms. And then preventing cross-contamination, and that is touching clean with dirty. So a good example of that is cutting raw chicken on a cutting board and then cutting lettuce on the same cutting board would be a quick example of cross-contamination. And there's lots of other opportunities for cross-contamination, especially in emergency situations. When the systems break down, shall we say, two critical of the issues that we see are temperature control and cleanliness and sanitation. So that first food safety rule, where we talk about cooking foods thoroughly and hot holding, is really not our biggest focus at this time. So in emergency situations, we really have two areas that are going to give us most trouble or create most problems. The first one is temperature control, because in our households, we require uninterrupted electricity to keep our cooling units working. And our cooling units will be our refrigerator and freezer. So that anytime we have electrical issues, we have a potential for risk of foodborne illness. The second area is the cleanliness and sanitation, that we really count on potable water and a potable water supply to prepare our food, as well as personal hygiene. So our running water in our sinks, we count on for personal cleanliness, and to keep our equipment and tools to be cleaned and in a state that they are sanitary for use. So during emergencies, these are really, of those 4 food safety rules, these are the ones that are going to give us or demand most attention, I should say. Temperature control and food safety. Controlling temperature of food is one of the most important things for prevention of foodborne illness. The temperature recommendations, and these are for consumer recommendations. Sometimes in commercial, there will be a little bit different temperatures than you're seeing here. And in fact, in Washington State, they use 41 degrees or colder for commercial establishments. So you will see a little bit different sometimes, especially when it becomes either a state level or commercial versus consumer. For consumers, we want refrigerators to run and operate and maintain a temperature of 40 degrees or colder. For freezers and freezer units, 0 degrees or colder. Sometimes refrigerator freezers, the ones that are either on top or beside the side-by-side refrigerators, sometimes the freezers are a little bit warmer than that. And we kind of call that long-term refrigeration. But for long-term keeping of food, 0 degrees or colder will give you about a year of quality maintenance. The foods that need temperature control, so we call them, in Washington, we call them either potentially hazardous foods or temperature control needed for safety. So our foods, if you think about in the grocery store when you buy a food, where is it located when you buy it? If it's under refrigeration when you buy it, it probably needs refrigeration at home. So our perishable foods or potentially hazardous foods: meat, fish, poultry, either raw or cooked. Soft cheeses and shredded cheeses. Soft cheeses would be like a brie, queso fresco, those type of cheeses. Milk, cream, yogurt, and other dairy products. Eggs, dough, and cooked pastas. Recently, lots of concerns with food safety with raw doughs. Cooked and cut fruits and vegetables, which might be a new one for some of you. And then seed sprouts. And these foods all require temperature control to maintain their safety. So they have a high risk to produce pathogens that will cause foodborne illness or food poisoning. We're starting to use that term again because foodborne illness doesn't resonate with a lot of people. So we are starting to use food poisoning again. So when they are out of temperature control, these foods have the risk of causing illness. One of the terms that we use for consumer education is the danger zone. And temperatures between 40 degrees and 140 degrees, that's considered the danger zone. And so for these perishable foods, a maximum time in that danger zone is 2 hours. So above 40 degrees, 2 hours maximum. We say 2 hours maximum at room temperature. So if you start to think about power, interrupted power sources and electricity, you can see we can get in a risk of pathogens growing pretty quickly. During an emergency, one of the recommendations, well, the first thing we recommend is that you have thermometers in your units. So a refrigerator and freezer thermometer. This also helps not even during emergencies, but it helps you see if your refrigerator or freezer is starting to kind of creep up in temperature, you can get an early warning that your unit is having problems. For example, my freezer unit was having a little trouble and I just watched its temperature creep up. It was a little bit below 0, then it was at 10 for a little bit and started creeping up to 20. So even though the food was still safe in there, you could see that I was starting to have problems with my freezer and gave me a chance to deal with the issue before I could lose the food in there. During an emergency, the recommendation, keep the doors closed. Well, that's a little bit challenging for people that are concerned about food safety who have thermometers because they want to keep checking the thermometer to see if it's still okay. But every time you open those doors, warm air from the room goes in, which increases it increases the temperature more quickly. Refrigerators will typically hold their temperature 4 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, but you have about 4 hours before it starts to be above 40 degrees. Freezers will hold their temperature longer. A fully loaded freezer, 48 hours. A freezer that's half full, about 24 hours. They do recommend that if your freezer's only half full, you can fill up gallon jugs with water to make it more full. Some people have their acts together enough to do that. Others of us don't. Also, for some of us, we never have that much space in our freezer, but that is a recommendation because it will hold temperature longer if you have the space filled with cold. One of the things you can do if you know it looks like the power is going to be out for a while is move some of your refrigerated foods into the freezer if you have space, because it is a colder space. After an emergency, the question is the food safe or not? And the temperature of the food will give you the answer. So first of all, we recommend you have a thermometer in your refrigerator and freezer so that you know what the temperature is when the power hopefully comes back on in a timely manner. If you don't, the temperature of the food is really what we're after. And there are infrared thermometers that are very useful for checking the surface temperature of foods. It is not for cooking foods when we're trying to get an internal temperature. We don't recommend these, but these are great to use for the surface temperature of foods. And in fact, my master food preservers do food safety monitoring at the food banks. And some of them use these to get the temperature. They do a temperature check of their refrigeration and freezing units daily. And this is a great tool because thawing is going to happen from the surface in. So if the surface temperature is still 40 degrees or colder, you know the inside temperature is even colder than that. So it's a great use of these infrared thermometers. And they use them a lot in mechanical type stuff. So you can get them at a very reasonable price at some of your box store type locations. So what do we do if food has been above 40 degrees? 40 degrees for more than 2 hours, and that falls into that danger zone recommendation. 2 hours or more above 40 degrees, the perishable foods, so the potentially hazardous foods or foods that require temperature control for safety, should be discarded. One of the popular questions is, well, I know heat destroys bacteria, so won't cooking make it safe? The reality is, for some of the organisms, that is true. It is not true for all the organisms. And sometimes we're going after the bacteria itself. Sometimes the bacteria, when the temperature has been in the danger zone, actually produces a toxin. So it's not always the bacteria that we're going after. There's a toxin produced, and some of those toxins are heat resistant. So you can't necessarily make it safe by cooking. But that is the thought that people have, is I know heat destroys bacteria, so won't that make it okay? So all perishable foods above 40 degrees, 2 hours or longer, should be discarded. Another popular question is about refreezing of foods. Food is safe to refreeze if it still contains ice crystals and is below 40 degrees. I get lots and lots of calls from people that say, well, I touched the food and it's still cold. Well, when you consider the 98 or the temperature of the human body touching something cool and moist, they all are going to feel cold. So we still like that objective measurement of 40 degrees or colder. And the ice crystals is suggesting it hasn't been warm for too long. One of the things we have lots of people that have cabins, is they put ice cubes in a little Ziploc plastic bag and put them into their freezer unit. And that can give you an indication if your power has been out for an extended period of time. Because if your ice cubes are melted, it's been pretty warm in there. Okay. Cleanliness and sanitation. Lots of us take for granted that we get clean water on a daily basis. And potable water is water that's safe to drink or to use for food preparation. And it really is critical in emergency situations for many things, but also to help control exposure to pathogens. I talked a little bit about cross-contamination using the example of the cutting raw chicken on a cutting board and then doing your lettuce. But one of the things that when everything is good, our municipal system takes away our waste products from humans, but there's also waste products from animals. And this is one of the reasons we really focus on controlling pests in food establishments, is that they carry disease, but also they leave waste product. One of the huge issues of pathogens, or huge problems with pathogens, is what we call the fecal oral route. Basically, people not washing their hands after they go to the bathroom. And this really, norovirus is one of our leading causes of foodborne illness. And it is transmitted by humans, fecal oral route. People have not washed their hands. Well, when all is good and we have opportunities to do that, that is one of our messages. But when you look at sources of pathogens being the digestive tract and human waste, or human and animal waste, soil and water, water disperses organisms beautifully. I mean, it does a beautiful job. So that when our systems, this is a picture of a flood situation, when our sewer systems overflow, when those municipal services, when everything doesn't go where it's supposed to, there's a huge issue with cross-contamination from humans and animals, and mixing all of these potential risks for pathogens. One of the things that can help under emergency situations, getting clean hands is critical to handling anything and preventing not just foodborne illness, but lots of illness. So this is a picture of a temporary hand washing station, and pretty simple to make, and very helpful under situations where you don't have potable water for personal hygiene. It takes an insulated water container with a spigot, and we want one that you can just push with your hand rather than have to turn it on, so that you can use your wrists to get the water running. Liquid soap, paper towels, a container for the wastewater, and a container for soiled paper towels and waste. And in fact, these will be used sometimes at temporary food events when people don't have running water. But probably one of the most valuable ways for people to get some cleanliness when there's a situation with contaminated water. The recommendation is that the water in the dispenser be 110 degrees or warmer, but that isn't always possible. So having running water is your number one goal. Number two goal is have it warm running water. Food that comes in contact with non-potable water. So flood situations, anytime food comes in contact with non-potable water. Discarding. Well, it's probably easier to start with what can you keep and then go through the others. Really, the only food that can be salvaged is food in commercial cans and full retort pouches. And so an example of this would be, for example, the tuna that you see in a retort pouch, the tuna in those pouches, as compared to, there are some juices that come in the foil type pouches, but they have that little place to put the straw in. That one we don't recommend trying to decontaminate. So really a full retort pouch or a commercial canned product. So that means discarding all your fresh foods, foods in containers with crimped lids, pull tabs. So even the commercial can that has the pull tab on it is recommended discarding, because that little place, that little rim is hard to decontaminate. Screw lids and snap lids. Cardboard juice boxes. Home canned foods. So you can empty the jars and wash the jars and clean them for use again. But we do not recommend using the home canned food in there, because of how difficult it is to decontaminate under that metal lid. So again, the only foods that we recommend salvaging, food in commercial cans that require can openers for opening, and the full retort pouch. Okay, Susan, I'll turn it over to you for the second poll question.
Mark, are you able to drop that second poll question in there? Whoops.
Yep, it should be up now.
All right, that one is, I think we actually have already done the second poll question, and this is
okay.
at the end. So
I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's all right. Let's move on.
Yeah, we'll move
carry on.
I think we did the second question already when people talked about readiness.
Oh.
So go ahead and
I
advance.
can't see the poll questions. So.
Okay, that's all right. Just go ahead.
I was going to say I can share. You want to share the results again? Just to look at the second poll.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, let's. If you want to look at that again, would be an appropriate time to look at the.
Everybody can just scroll down.
Yeah, the second question.
And this is little. If we were fiction writers, we call this foreshadowing. We did a little foreshadowing with this poll question about additional things Lizann is going to talk about. Okay, thank you. Lizann, do you want to advance?
Yep. Okay, so for sanitizing and decontaminating, the first recommendation is it needs to be washed. So you need visible dirt off for any sanitizing situation. It needs to be rinsed and washed in soap and water, then rinsed again in potable water. So again, that need for water that is has been treated to eliminate pathogens and other hazards. And then for those commercial cans, take the labels need to be removed before they're sanitized. So you need a permanent marker to mark what is inside that can. It goes into a sanitizing solution of a tablespoon of bleach per gallon of room temperature water, and should soak for 15 minutes in the bleach water, then come out and air dry for at least an hour before it is used. The recommendation of room temperature water, what happens is people think they want to use hot because they have the idea that heat destroys bacteria. So they use hot water, and that volatilizes the bleach, which probably lots of you are familiar with this because of the emergency preparedness across the board. But consumers that's really difficult for them to understand because they want heat there. They think the heat helps. So we really want it kind of room temperature water in order to have the maximized sanitizing power. A very handy publication, and this is put out by USDA Food Safety, and it's an infographic that really covers what we just talked about, and very helpful for consumers, and a really good, useful visual for to help people understand. It's a very common question. As a food safety county faculty, I get lots of situational temperature issues. You know, freezers out, refrigerators out, not necessarily the widespread ones, but lots of situational power issues. So this is a really handy publication for consumers to have. There is a recommendation, and for the situational type where it's one or two households, not the whole community, there are recommendations that you can use dry ice to maintain the temperature of your refrigerator and freezer. Certainly when there's a widespread emergency situation in a community, that's not a real practical suggestion. But for individuals that are either they have a freezer unit that's gone out, that is an option. And there are recommendations out there on how to use dry ice to hold temperature in appliances. They vary depending on size of appliance. But they are out there under emergency preparedness places. But this is a beautiful infographic for people to have. Okay.
Okay, everybody, could you please click on this link that's in the chat pod shortly and take a survey here. And it just takes a few minutes to do the survey. I really encourage you to think about other topics you'd like to see webinars presented on, or volunteer to present webinars related to disaster preparedness, response, or readiness. There's the link in the chat pod. Can you, everyone see that? It's a Qualtrics survey.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. Just click on that and just answer the survey here if you would.
And there's a question in Q&A. I don't know if we want to take that now.
Let's let people focus on the survey first. We've got plenty of time left here in our webinar.
Mark, this would be a great time to drop in that last poll that you had.
Well, it wasn't, Virginia. That all that last poll was just, it was asking if they had, I think if they had just completed. Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, that's if they were, if they've completed the survey. Yeah. Okay, okay, so there we go. And I'll let y'all know, sort of as people vote, I'll let you know when they're finished with the survey.
Someone said they don't see the survey. What you do is go into click on the little chat icon at the bottom of your page. If you don't see that, you just move your mouse down there and it'll pop up. Click on that, and there's a URL in there to click on. HTTPS, Auburn, Qualtrics, etc. Please put another message in the chat or Q&A pod if you still can't see that. And Lizann, for your brain to be thinking about, we have a question. Is it possible to reprocess home canned foods to sanitize them?
Tell me when you're ready for that answer.
Okay.
We've got about 11 of 21 that say they've completed the survey.
Lizann has some very interesting stories pertaining to questions she gets regarding food safety that involve canning using irons and canning using dishwashers. So I hope you share some of those with us. People can create their own disasters, can't they?
I will start when we talk again about the most recent interesting one.
Got about 16 of 21 now.
Lizann, can you read the question that's in the chat pod?
I do not see the chat pod, and it's probably my technological limitation.
Move your cursor, your little mouse cursor, down to the very bottom of your screen, and hopefully that
So because Lizann is sharing her screen, her toolbar is moved up top. And so
Oh.
Lizann, you'll want to look up top and then you'll see a little dot, dot, dot more. And I think that's where you're going to find chat. For just Susan, so you know, when you're sharing your screen, it sort of moves things around, so her view's a little different than ours.
That's probably an appropriate statement anyway.
Well, I can certainly just read it to you. It says, when a disaster warning is first issued, what could a person do to keep their food safe?
Are we ready for questions? Or we're still
I think
waiting?
so. We might have all the people completing the survey who are going to complete it.
Okay. So to back up, let me do the canned food one first. And I do see the chat box now. So the first one on the question, could you read that one again about reprocessing?
Yes. Is it possible to reprocess home canned foods to sanitize them?
Okay. So your issue with the home canned food is not that the food inside the jar has become unsafe. It is the contamination on the outside of the jar, and especially in a home canned food, you have that rubber gasket that is on the canning lid. And the concern is that when you do the sanitizing step like that is recommended for the commercial canned food, that we are confident will get that can sanitized, not sterilized. The concern is that rim around the top and getting that sanitized. So it is not the processing of the food. The food has not become unsafe inside there. It is the outside container and the contamination on it. So reprocessing is not, it would not deal with the issue that we're looking at. And Susan asked me to share one of my interesting ones. This year's most interesting one was the guy who put 50 jars of fruit in his bathtub and turned the hot water on and covered them and counted on that to seal the jars. So
well, that was a hot water bath. That was correct, wasn't it?
He did it intentionally. We actually had somebody several years ago thinking that's what the hot water bath was. But this guy did it just as he thought it was a better idea than the boiling water canner. So that's part of the fun. Those of you that work with the public and consumers, that's part of the fun of working with the public is you can't even imagine what they're going to come up with. Okay, so for the question, when a disaster warning is first issued, what could a person do to keep their food safe? And I forgot to mention the whole preparedness and your family emergency kit, having that kit ready, including your food supply of non-perishable foods. So hopefully that's done before the disaster warning even happens with your family, your preparedness kit, so that you have foods that are safe. There isn't, depending on what the disaster is, when your temperature control and how is that going to work. So there are recommendations for dry ice that can go in refrigerators and freezers to keep them cold during an emergency. And that is assuming that your only issue is going to be power and electrical source. If there's a flood issue, the other is some of the flood recommendations are get your appliances up, especially if you have a freezer in your garage, have it on blocks so it's up off the floor so that flood waters won't get to those. So those are some suggestions. Oh, so the question of where you can get dry ice in your community, that will vary. In the community I live in, we have a dry ice supplier, and as well, you can get it, and this is giving a name, so I'm not promoting just this store, but Fred Meyer, which is the Kroger Corporation, does sell dry ice through their store. So finding that source, and that is also goes back to the question by Jamie, that when a disaster warning is first issued, to know where dry ice is available in your community would be helpful. Okay, I'm reading the one. It was mentioned that food should be below 40 degrees to be refrozen. What is the best way to test this, particularly for foods that are difficult to penetrate with a food thermometer, or where outside food temperature may be significantly warmer than inside temperature? With thawing, so in the environment, if you have a refrigerator or freezer thermometer in there, if your freezer has warmed but has made it to 32 degrees, and you can be assured that your food in there is not warmer than 32 degrees. That infrared thermometer is very helpful for surface temperatures of food. And you don't need to penetrate, because in a thawing, it's going to warm up on the outside first before the center. For cooking temperatures, we need an internal temperature of food. But for temperatures on refrigerator and freezer, for the temperature of the food, we just need a surface temperature of that food. Those infrared thermometers you can find them fairly inexpensively. Like, I guess inexpensive is a relative term, but in the $35 to $50 neighborhood. Some, I don't know what they use them for, but some people that do a lot of garage work have them in their garages. So I think I've had people say, "Oh, my husband has one of those. I'll go get it and see." So but they are available fairly inexpensively. But if you have a refrigerator or freezer thermometer in there, the ambient temperature, the food in there is not going to be warmer than that, as long as it's been in there. I mean, cooling down is another issue, but not really an issue in this situation. So if that makes sense, great. If not, ask more questions.
Lizann, I have a question for you, just a clarification. Earlier you said that it's sometimes recommended to add gallons of water to the freezer to make it full. That you are saying pre-freeze this water, right?
Oh, not necessarily. If times are good, like the first slide, okay, yes. Pre-freeze the water before the emergency, yes. I thought you meant pre-freeze before it went into the freezer. So to freeze those gallons of water when times are good, just filling the vacant space with those is the recommendation, just to make it more full. Yes, that is correct. Do it when the times are good.
Thanks. I always need lots of clarification.
And Lizann, you mentioned sanitation and sterilization. There's also cleaning and disinfecting. Can you explain the difference between all those terms?
So what we're after with sanitation is getting the pathogens out of there. We're not going after getting rid of every organism there is. And sterilization would be, if you think of surgical equipment, you're sterilizing it. You want every organism gone. What we're after with sanitation is getting rid of the organisms likely to cause illness or problems. And there are different levels. A good example is norovirus, which is a viral cause of foodborne illness, that when it's present, we recommend a whole different level of sanitizing agent. So either the bleach or another sanitizing product. When that organism is present, there's a recommendation for a higher level. But one of the things to think about is that when we sanitize, we're using, other chemicals. People have this idea of, they don't even think of, people want to put bleach on their vegetables to make them safe, and you're putting other chemicals and going to consume those. So we don't want to dump more chemicals into our environment than we need. So that's what the recommendation for sanitation is, kind of a baseline to get rid of pathogenic organisms.
Thanks. And are the concentrations of bleach the same in all over-the-counter bleaches that are sold?
It depends. There's a pretty standard, but you do want to look for, I think it's 6%. I'm not sure of the exact name of it. And you want unscented, preferably. But
when you talk then about a tablespoon in a gallon or whatever the
right.
dilution is, that's based on that 6%?
Yeah, but it's pretty. Sometimes, I know this goes back to the food side. Sometimes with vinegar, there's a lower percent. There's a 4% instead of 5%. The store brand will be a little bit cheaper. So, but typically, it depends on how many bleach options you have in the stores that you're at. Typically, they are in that neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Just going to go back in the chat pod. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay, the webinar has been recorded and it will be archived and available for viewing by yourselves or others in the future. Lizann, can you advance to the next slide and we'll discuss some other Eden offerings. And you can move Lizann's photo all around your screen so you can see what's there. This is the Eden website homepage, and Eden stands for the Extension Disaster Education Network, in case anyone's not aware of that. And it's a great website for extension educators for resources and updates and Eden notes and all kinds of things about what's happening in disaster education. In the chat pod, Jerry has mentioned or has located the URL for where the recording will be, and you can share that with colleagues who maybe missed today's presentation. Lizann, can you advance another slide? Oh, sorry, the Eden URL's below. And here we have e-extension and our community of agricultural disaster preparedness and recovery. Have many, many, many articles in there about how to prepare and prevent, prepare for disasters, respond to them, and mitigate their impacts on all kinds of subjects. The URL is below, eextension.org/disasters. And we have topics on the homepage, the landing page there that rotate regularly. And another advance, please, Lizann. And here we have Eden's many numerous ways to stay involved with social media, Pinterest and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, all these things, and the Eden notes. Jerry has mentioned, she's put the URLs there in the chat pod for all the links to these sites we've talked about for more resources and more events. And can you please advance, Lizann? And there we go. Certainly, thank you all for joining us today. And if there are other topics that you'd like to see, put them in the chat pod, or if you're able to present on a subject related to Eden's area of work, please contact one of us. And with that, I believe we're all set. And again, thank you for presenting today, Lizann, and thank you, Eden, for sponsoring this webinar.